I'm one of your hosts, Aaron Stayman, alongside my colleague, Cara, Clanton Pope. So welcome to our session today. Our agenda in brief is the introduction. That's the part that we're doing right now. We'll then be talking to data, marketers, storytelling, telling you what the deal is. We'll then walk you through what makes a good story quite a few times over, give you some tips to make your story stronger, and we'll leave you with some takeaways for what's ahead with working with your data and webinars that we have coming up. So we're going to record this meeting that's going on right now. I see a number of requests from, I think, AI bots. I'm just going to link it, note that. We're going to pop a poll into the chat here that we're going to keep open through the course of this meeting. Just letting us know who you are. We're not going to have an introduction from each of you the same way we're going to have from Cara and myself, but you are welcome to share a little bit about yourself in a very narrow scope in terms of just your experience level with reporting and analytics. And if you could wave a magic wand, what you would do with your reporting. So those polls are now open. You're welcome to continue putting those answers in through the course of this session. And we'll go ahead and move forward and just tell you a little bit about us here. And Cara, I'm going to pass to you to start off that fun process.
Thank you so much. And we'll, like I said, we're seeing those polls run in. If you want to complete them, I'll move them out of your way. I know that's kind of annoying. But with that being said, I'm Cara Clanton Pope. I'm so excited to be here with you all today. Real quick, a little bit about my background. I have been in the Salesforce analytics ecosystem for goodness, I got to update this 10 plus years. I feel like it's closer now to 15. I just feel like that ages me so much when I say that. But I've learned a lot. I've found a passion for analytics and so just excited to share that today. 9 times certified, from Salesforce, advanced admin to data cloud. I like to dabble in getting certs and how they can help customers. So again, just excited to be here, but I'll kick it back over to you, Aaron.
Yeah, and I'm Aaron. I am joining us from Cara. I'm our marketing analytics program manager here at Sercante, and I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem for a little over 6 years. Doing primarily work in marketing cloud intelligence, formerly known as Datarama. You might hear me slip into that verbiage occasionally. That's just second nature for me. I'm also Data Cloud certified, and collectively, in case you couldn't do the math, Cara and I have about 15 years or more in the ecosystem of Salesforce. We have knowledge collectively between the two of us of CRMA, Marketing Cloud Intelligence, Data Cloud, and a number of other reporting tools that we've dabbled into. And collectively between us, one thing I'll just note, you're going to see some examples of theoretical client dashboards that are examples of good processes, bad processes. Those are amalgamations of 100 different clients or more that we've worked with over the years. So just to caveat that and what we're coming into this with. And we've done the poll. So we're going to talk today about why you're here. What a data storyteller is. So data storytellers align teams around a shared vision for data projects. They identify useful metrics, and the best way to visualize those metrics and discuss them really as the shepherds of your data is really the way that we're thinking about this. Maybe it's a technical person, but you don't need to be. Often the most important thing in being a data storyteller is bringing a strategic mindset to the fold. And often when we're dealing, as Cara and I, as consultants in the analytics space, often the data storytellers we're working with are the main stakeholders in data integrity or visualization projects. So if we go to the next slide, what we're going to talk about is just, again, a little bit more about what makes a data storyteller. Data storytellers understand the data they're working with. They understand what data is available and what data is needed, as well as who to consult about those data issues, whether in-house or out-of-house. Again, we want to emphasize that data storytellers don't need to be technical experts. They don't need to know the exact flow down to the nitty-gritty detail of how data gets into platforms. And they don't necessarily need to be the people building the visualizations. But data storytellers, as we're defining them, know their organization. They know the general story of the data that they want to tell, and they know how that story should look if it's put together properly and what the insights that can be driven on. So to make that a little more practical, as we head into the section of our deck that gets into the guidance, we're going to talk to you about that overview. If we go to the next slide.
And actually, Aaron, real quick, before we go too far, I think to that point that you're just pointing out, I kind of want to share these poll results. We actually had a lot of people fill them out, but I think this lends to a lot of what you're seeing and like what makes good storyteller and why people are here. So real quick, I want to just share these results and show like again experience level. Like a lot of people are getting started or generally use results and create standard reports, but just would love to see a little bit more assistance with that. And then again, if you can wave a magic wand, that's one of my favorite phrases. What do you wish you had with your reports? And it looks like, again, to your point, like there's just so much. How do we get organized is a big one, simplification, and then data that updates in real time. So I think these are very telling about kind of what you're noting out here, Aaron. But I just wanted to say, is there anything on those that you also wanted to call out?
No, I think that's great. And I think all of these, just to that point, obviously we constructed the poll, we constructed the deck. You're going to see a lot of pieces that integrate into these questions. And I'm especially excited to see that these are people who are really driving the stories, using dashboards to review results and also to organize, because those are the core tips that we're giving here. So great call out, Cara. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And now we're going to talk about, again, we're talking about marketers to data storytelling pros. So what are the hurdles that we're looking at in being experts in telling the story? And not to keep you hanging too long, these are the answers. So the common blockers that we see are extensive MarTech stacks, right, where data is so prevalent and it becomes a question of we have these 100 or more tools. How do we get what's useful out of there and bring that data together? Marketers also are often missing the full data picture. Often one of the touch points we're going to talk about a lot across this deck as technical people, marketers, is that often you have teams that don't fully communicate with each other. And in that, you also have issues of people not knowing who the reporting is going to be spread to, who it's for, as well as miscommunications, again, on goals across teams. And of course, my personal favorite, technical hurdles and gaps in knowledge that we really try to help mend. So the things that we're going to be giving you to help with these today are really helping you to understand how you define SMART goals and objectives, how you provide clear audience definitions, create accessible and concise content, and actionable and interactive reporting. And we're going to go in depth into all of these, starting in the next few slides. But just one question before we get to that part, which is really just to simply frame it for yourself. I think, I think we have great webinar content here at Circonte, but in order to maximize the value out of this, I think I would just encourage everybody to think about why you're here. You don't have to tell us in the chat. You're certainly welcome to, and you've answered in the polling as well. But just think about what are the things that you want to take away from today so that you can get the most out of this presentation. Think about whether it's reports not making an impact, whether trying to visualize core metrics most effectively on a dashboard or report, or if you're trying to harmonize sets of data in an effective way, or maybe it's something unique that we're not thinking about here that you're welcome to, again, share with us either here in the question and answer section, whatever it might be. But just important, I think, as we move forward to just kind of frame for yourself what the pieces that you're looking to solve here. And Cara, I'm going to pass to you to jump into this next section.
Yeah. So I want us to be thinking about good stories and bad stories. I think we all have probably been either the person telling the bad story. I will say I am so guilty. A lot of my friends give me a hard time of I tell the worst, longest stories with way too much detail. But we want to frame these in like when you're communicating your dashboards, what is the art that makes a good story, right? So I'll kind of start with like the good. We're framing this in a lot of like the good and the bad, right? When we think about storytelling, and I'll echo Aaron from earlier. That doesn't mean like bad, as in like I think the context we would think bad, but think more like a challenge, right? So what makes a like challenging story, bad story here? A lot of times is when we're telling that story, it's something that they don't care about, right? Again, guilty. I feel like I do that a lot, but there's misalignment on what we're communicating and what is important. Another one is you're telling the story to the wrong audience. I will also say extremely guilty of telling a story to my mother that maybe was more appropriate for friends, right? I think again, we all know that we've all been there, done that. Or again, too much detail. So the data is your story in this case is missing, disjointed. Are you using inside jokes that the other person just has no insight to, right? Like that's just too much detail. Or there's no clear objective. Like there's no moral of the story. What are we wanting somebody to feel or to do afterwards? And surprisingly, these are the elements that we can think through and build our dashboards around, right? So when we think about like this storytelling and what makes a good story, we can turn it back on the flip side of that, right? Clear goal alignment when we are thinking about our reporting and our dashboards, clear audience viewpoint, and then simplicity and clarity so we can get those so we can get the findings quicker, right? I know I saw a lot of people put like automating in there. This is a big point to that. And then, takeaways and actioning. How do we actually bake this in and use this? So we will kind of think through our formatting really in this style of this construction of a dashboard, really in this format of a story that we're telling. So why does your audience care? And again, this is probably the biggest thing that we want to think through, like getting goal alignment and getting input. And so I'll actually start first with goal setting with an example. And we're going to like give our stories a title and y'all can't make fun. These just what popped in my head. But like I called this dashboard, this conversation with my customer, the whole 9 yards. And so when I had first met with this customer, I truly feel like they as a marketing team really knew what they wanted to communicate, but I feel like their objectives from leadership was everything was important and everything was a priority. So really when they were thinking through, nothing was becoming a priority and nothing became important, right? That old adage, I feel like we've all been there where it's hard to define your goal if everything feels important. And as we were working through and we were building out this dashboard, and it was a couple of different dashboards, but there was one main one that they wanted to walk away with. And the stakes kept changing. So every time we would come back and review and get back together on it, it was, okay, well, now we need to add this in. They're asking for this, we're changing, right? And that's where the goal and the point of the dashboard got lost. We didn't really have the reference point to come back and anchor what it was that we were trying to clearly communicate. And so again, if we think about a story, I think that's so easy to do when we are thinking about a story and pulling in and wanting to, achieve everything. It's easy to get off track, but a good story it's clear. We know what the goal and objective is of that story. And so that really is truly a guiding post for your dashboards as well. And a lot of that truthfully led to burnout with the customer. I think they also felt like they were missing objectives that leadership wanted to communicate. And so overall was truly a big struggle for them. But I'll kick it over to Aaron to say to talk about the flip side of where's an example of like a good goal setting dashboard.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things for me is that I noted this at the top, but I've primarily been in marketing cloud intelligence from Salesforce, previously known as Datarama. And the core value of that platform is really there's so many different ways that you could connect data. There's over 100 different marketing vendors that you can bring in across like social media and paid media. But really the bread and butter of that platform is creating a paid media kind of picture. And really, this is something that I think there's probably not a team that I've worked with either here at Salesforce that doesn't have some kind of paid media view when using that platform. And really being able to have just plain text that says, here's what's being reported on, and being able to see for any audience, these are the core metrics that we're looking at. If you're showing this to an executive team, here's our highlights, and really being able to just keep that front and center and stating clearly what this page is. There's no question mark as to what's being reported here. It's a paid media overview. and allows for some depth if people want to, but really just has a clearly defined objective and doesn't try to boil the ocean, which is the common pitfall that it is very easy to fall into in a platform that gives you pretty free reign.
So I think what's most important about this is really like clarity and focus, right? So a few things that help when we set up our goals for our dashboards or goal, the report we're trying to build out, it establishes that clear objective. Everybody knows what's, what the point of the dashboard is, and how we want to present it. And then it also helps us track progress against specific targets. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir a little bit there, but that is the whole point of a dashboard to begin with, is being able to track those things, right? So if we have those goals set up to begin with and those objectives, generally that's going to help us identify success and areas of improvement moving forward. And then it also enhances users' engagement, right? And I think about a story that I'm telling as well. If I know what the user or the audience in this case is wanted to get out of it, I can tailor the story to them to make them feel more engaged. And I think that's true with dashboards as well. It makes them more meaningful to those stakeholders. So there are a few things that you can do as far as like tips for goal setting. This is not the end all be all, right? But there are ways we can think about this. And so obviously make this your own that you find works really well with your organization. But like, one of my biggest advice I give to customers is like, start small. If you feel like it is all over the place, it's really hard to define, I always say, like, use the rule of three. Start with what are three goals, write them down. And then again, you don't need to boil the ocean, and you can reiterate on it later and build more to it, but have a clear definition for that dashboard for the goals you're trying to achieve, right? Another great thing is to ask, what is leadership focused on? I think that's, if I think about my story earlier, if we would have started out with clear guidelines and objectives of like, okay, here's how these KPIs or goals are supporting the company and what leadership is looking at, that I think that would have helped really organize and focus their dashboard and what they were trying to do. And so I think, again, that goes back to that agreement piece. Everybody's in agreement on what KPIs support those company goals. And then, like, again, this is my favorite. Write it down, stay accountable, have documentation in some shape, way, or form. And it doesn't have to be the most beautiful documentation, but just something in place where people can go back. I actually use a user story a lot of times here, where I am breaking down, all right, here's what the goal is. I write those in a document so people can see it, and then have user stories that I think really help focus that as well. So by staying accountable, everybody can reference that back and agree upon it. And then if you start to lose your way, that document works as a guidepost to get us back in focus when you're building out your analytics dashboard there too.
And this is my section, but Cara, I'm about to pass it back to you. We're going to talk about just who you're telling the audience to and defining that audience accordingly. Cara, take it away.
Yeah, I promise I'll let you talk at some point, Aaron. No, so I think one thing that I really like about this too is you'll hear a lot of this conversation around why defining the audience is so important, and especially when it comes to building out reports for marketers. I feel like we've kind of come to this point where we can be a jack of all trade for everyone, especially with a lot of data that comes in. And a lot of times we're the one managing a lot of that data, right? And so when I think about this customer, this was exactly what happened with them, where they were managing so much of their data, but it was a lot of times like in Excel spreadsheets. What leadership was looking at, marketing was not necessarily communicating to leadership. And so a lot of times it was missing, like their dashboards are really built for the end marketer and benchmarking, but leadership was missing a lot of those bigger goals that they were achieving. And so because those dashboards were a little too in the weeds. Like I said, they just kind of missed a lot of what I feel like was a hard work that marketing was doing. And so with the audience being a little skewed, it caused, again, I think some misalignment on building out that dashboard. And one thing I'll say that I think is really interesting for this customer too is that they knew a lot of that, but didn't know how to connect the dots. And so I think a lot of times that taking that step back and again identifying the audience made such a huge difference because they were able to cohesively come together and decide based off, again, the persona that they were working towards. And you'll notice a lot of these things are similar, I think, to the themes all kind of tie together. And I think that's why they're so important. Like an audience and goal setting are so important that I think you'll see a lot of those overlap or feel like they overlap, but they're all pieces to the puzzle that make such a big impact. But again, that was a bad one. And I feel like, Aaron, you get all the fun, good ones. So tell us about a good example.
Yeah, spoiler alert. I think I've got most of the good ones in this presentation. That's not a statement on Cara and I's quality, but just to note that. So the example I think of, again, all these are kind of iterative to just common stories that we see, especially from my marketing analytics lens of the Datorama or Marketing Cloud Intelligence platform. A lot of the time, what we're setting up in there is really just those initial data connections. That's why people bring in a technical vendor and help us do that implementation work. In the example here, which I've seen in some other formats as well, the marketing team wanted to be able to tell stories quickly to a specific group of people on their team. They brought us a PowerPoint deck and a set of PDFs and said, we really like the way that this is laid out. Here's exactly the people who are reading this. Here's how often they're reading it. What can we do to automate that and flare that up inside of intelligence? And that kind of mindset we see a lot, especially as like our second level, I would say, once data and initial visualizations are set. And it really allowed us to create tailored dashboards specifically for individual people and even tailored notes. I think this is one thing that we try to keep in mind, and you'll see in some other places as well, but where there's places where you can create plain English language of like, hey, you're looking at a website trend section, or here's the question that we're posing by putting this data in here, or here's an asterisk about something that was happening at that time. You really are able to define for an audience exactly what they should be seeing without having to have any guesswork involved. Again, we had a clear lens of who the story was geared to and why. And anytime you have that, it doesn't have to be a specific report that you're building out. It could be just a general process, but having that definition is really useful. And I'll talk you through now some of the general processes and tips that we recommend for this. So having a point of view, we think is really valuable. Every story, when you, again, think about just narrative, dashboards can't be for everyone, right? You need to have a guiding figure or a persona. And a lot of the times, the things that kind of dip between my world and Cara's collectively are that we see personas that include marketers, sales teams, executives, often looking at even some of the same dashboards and trying to look at things in different ways. As much as you can possibly curate, think of your dashboards as art. You need to help your audience see the path to interpreting it the way that you want them to see that. One of the things that I really like to do that some platforms have better than others is being able to add in filters for your data to help the dashboard become more personal. One of the things that you might see on some of my screenshots and you might see on some of Cara's as well is being able to filter by a specific time range, being able to filter by campaigns, marketing channel that you're looking at, any of that kind of customization to let somebody make it their own while not hampering somebody else's experience is really valuable. And to that same point, making dashboards interactive and allowing wherever possible on your platforms for clickable drill downs. Sometimes that limit is filters. Sometimes if you're in a platform like Tableau or in CRMA, you might be able to click on something and do a deeper dive. Really can help to drive that curiosity and engagement for people as well. If we go to the next slide, these are our quick hit tips that we want you to remember, if nothing else from this section, is just to remember how you define your audience. The core step, of course, I think first and foremost is identifying your key stakeholders, who's going to be using your dashboard and why, and then thinking about the accessibility to them, right? Dashboard should really be easy for users to enter and not come with an instruction manual, but should be easy to just operate. You should be able to focus on actionable insights and key metrics. really makes it easy to understand what you're looking at if those are defined. And thinking about the context as you design a dashboard also, and trying to put yourself, this is something I try to do as much as possible. I'm sure, Cara, you do as well. Really try to think about how will your audience be using the dashboard? What does a typical instance of them clicking through it look like? And just trying to make sure that you have that context in mind. And Cara, I'm going to pass it to you for this next section. And I think, again, we continue the trend, if I'm not mistaken, of you getting the bad one and me getting the good one.
Good one. Yeah, man, always. Now, so I think this next one is a fan favorite of mine to actually talk through like the bad because I am so guilty of this and I totally get the why. But I think when we think about teasing things out, a lot of times, a lot of the issue can simply just be there is way too much detail, right? I think in the poll, we had a lot of people mention, hey, we want to keep organized. There's so much data, and especially for marketers nowadays, that's such a huge challenge. And so I like to call this my Lord of the Rings dashboard. They truly were trying to have one dashboard to rule them all. Don't that's my favorite bad joke to tell also. I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan. Anyway, but I think this was so true. There were so many filters, there were so many components that by the time they were trying to get in there, the data took such a hit. And it was one of those things where like I totally got the vision though. I got what they were trying to do. They wanted a one-stop shop, easy communication where everybody could come in, didn't matter what department, what end user, everybody was in agreement. But the issue was, there was just too much detail. No action could be taken. The point of the dashboard got lost. And so that's so important to think about that. Again, I feel like I just come up a lot is where if you can't get to a quick answer, we're probably trying to put too much into one dashboard and it could be split simply into two and make a world of difference. So like I said, I think this is such a big one that again was one of my favorites. And we finally turned out to end up being like such a great experience and how they brought it out. But it was so telling because I feel like customers this happens all the time and is so frequent. But Aaron, I think you have such a good one here about the pace yourself.
Yeah, and I've done pacing in Marketing Cloud Intelligence specifically for media buy data a few times. That's what the example screenshot here is from the media pacing app, which is a premium feature of intelligence that I don't see as often as much anymore. But I just remember working with one team in particular here. This is an example where I'm thinking of a specific client where really they had so much data. They had multiple teams that we were working with across different organizations even, not just one company. And really just trying to gather all that data was so complex. But I think the thing that I consistently remember from that, even all these years later, is just how the end outcome of what we put together was so simply defined as just here's where our media is pacing. Here's a simple report of the types of media that we're selling and that we're buying rather. And effectively just being able to say, here's how we're pacing across time and just lay it out. I think this is an example of there could have really been so much more detail we could have drowned in, but being able to simplify that process and kind of hide the complexity from the people who are the end users is also just really valuable.
And I think to your point, like something that I find really impactful here when we think about keeping it simple, and then something you just said that I want to call out that I think is really important around your end user, right? And if we think about again, what an audience that we're building to, the level of detail is also relevant there, right? I think to Aaron's point, the end users, there is time where a dashboard, you need to be able to get into the weeds. And I think especially for, marketers here, that a lot of times is how we are benchmarking, how we're looking at improvement we're seeing with the marketing assets, right? And so, but I think, what we're trying to impart here is, especially when you are looking at a dashboard that a lot of people are maybe referencing back or I think to that C-suite is a lot of times where my mind goes is this tends to be the objection of like the clarity and comprehension, right? If you can simplify that complex data and makes it easier for users to grasp, whether that is again, placement, the type of visualization you're using, but it helps them grasp those insights quickly, and then you can move to the actioning quicker. I think a big piece here also is reducing that cognitive load. You don't want to have to necessarily hunt to find the answer in your dashboard. And so I think minimizing that mental effort is key, especially I think for marketers. A lot of times when we're trying to communicate our goals and objectives, we don't want to have to, again, hunt for it to try to communicate that. And again, a faster decision making process. That to me, a lot of times is number one. I want to be able to streamline that process so I can then go action it, right? Hey, I want to be able to see, am I having my forms reducing, lead submission? Okay, well, I want to fix that quickly. That is my lead generation, right? So I want to be able to identify that quickly. But if I am trying to hunt for that on a dashboard of all the different pieces, that can be really hard to navigate, and I can't get to that action faster, right? And then again, just effective communication. And again, if we think about going back to this as a story that we're trying to communicate, if this is something I'm trying to impart, it's easy to get bogged down in the details, and sometimes that's just not necessary. So I think by ensuring the most important things stand out, that's how you can really effectively communicate your objective and your winnings as a marketer. So a few just actionable tips for simplifying. So make it concise, right? So you can always make more dashboards, and I'm sure a few will be like, no, I have too many dashboards, please don't. But I want to go back to the concept earlier of, again, you don't have to have one dashboard that rules them all. One of my favorite things I worked with the customers, we actually ended up doing a almost like a home screen, if you will, but we embedded all of our dashboards with links on this one home screen where people can go to these different dashboards, but they just had to remember one place to get to them. So a lot of times it's not like the number of dashboards, it's the more, hey, where should we go? How do we keep everybody going to the right place? And in harmony, and that a lot of times is just like positioning it with one dashboard, or sorry, with one home screen. Again, I call this like, put your hero metrics up top. What's going to make the biggest impact? Again, put it before the scroll, or I think it's before the fold, if we're thinking about journalism, but again, before the scroll when you're on your dashboard, what's most important? You don't want to have people scroll to find it. I love this. It should be a children's book, not War and Peace, right? We don't want them, it should be easy to digest. We don't have to like think about it and do a dissertation to be able to figure out what our KPIs are, right? And then surprisingly, this is my pet peeve. So I hope this is not, I'm not just on an island by myself here, but loading speeds is such a pet peeve of mine. I hate building a report or a dashboard, and it takes forever just to get the screen to pop up with data, right? Think about that from your end user as well. The more components you have, or the more charts, whatever, more data and details you have on that dashboard, that can affect your load time. And so keeping it simple can also make that a big difference too.
And I think, Cara, this is the one time that I have the bad example, so I get to.
Oh, nice. All right.
Over. So the main thing, to close out any story, with the exception of Seinfeld, everything should really have a moral, a lesson you're taking away, and something that's actionable. So the example that we're going to give here is really just an amalgamation of the perfect storms that we see sometimes, where a team, we talk about all these different Salesforce products and the MarTech stack in general. It'll happen that sometimes a team doesn't really know why they have a tool, and we'll be approached to come in. And I tend to think that usually we turn this from bad to good, not always, but we really aim to. And maybe the team comes in without any kind of vision. There's no real data storytelling owner. And in the worst of these situations, the organization's data might be really spread out across teams, and maybe one of the teams that has access to that data and has any knowledge of it isn't the team that we're working with and trying to prove the value with. And what often happens as the natural trigger for people is to try to throw in the kitchen sink and just try to prove something useful. We try to avoid that approach, but sometimes that's the lens that people come to us with. So that's kind of the example here, is not really, I think, the moral of this entire deck is making sure if you're on this call and you're responsible for visualization and reporting, that you take the ownership of being the data storyteller and always try to come with a vision as well. Kara, I'll let you have the fun with a good one for once.
Absolutely. So this is, surprisingly enough, this was one that like I was so impressed, and it's been a few years ago now, but it has stuck with me ever since. It's something I always mention. And when we got together, they knew exactly what they really just needed help connecting some of the data on the back end, but they knew exactly when they were using the dashboard, what action they wanted their users to take, and it was readily available for users. So it was such an impactful piece. And I think the thing that jumped out to me the most are like, no, we use this in our bi-weekly meeting to review and have like a retrospective on our marketing assets. And I was like, oh, that makes so much sense that you literally are, this is something you are reviewing in a meeting and you have it as a standing component in your process. And so I think that in itself can make the world of a difference when you actually have like there's a clear action you're wanting your end users to take, but also as the person who's building out and using these, like you are baking it into your process as well. And so I think that was just one of those things that just went, I think, above and beyond, and something I always recommend to customers now. And a question I generally will ask of, how are you going to be using this in your process day to day? So it made a world of difference. But Aaron, I'll kick it over to you about some good tips here.
Yeah, just to reiterate again on what is valuable in terms of actioning, really being purposeful and encouraging users to engage with data meaningfully rather than just passively observing it. I think, just making sure that it's a part of people's repertoire, which we'll touch on a little bit more also, is really important. That it shouldn't be just a thing you have; it should be something that you're utilizing. Also, thinking about how you build data to be made for timely interventions to basically facilitate prompt action in response to trends that you're consistently looking at, and really trying to think about how your data is presented proactively to help account for things ahead of time, not to be something that you later, uh, have to be fixing. In that same mindset, though, we recognize that there are opportunities always for continuous improvement, and creating an environment where there is that opportunity to provide feedback and enhance your strategies based on that data, whether that's updating dashboards as you go and as you realize that there's more opportunities. I think that's something that we see a lot. I'll speak for myself at least, of kind of something that we think about a lot is like this, if this, then what, that people realize, whoa, I can do this thing. What else could I report on? Promoting that kind of process, I find is really valuable. As well as creating accountability. You can't really be held to account for things that you don't know how to measure, and understanding that dashboards are really a way to have a finger on the pulse, is something that we also encourage people to keep in mind in terms of taking action out of these things. And of course, you want to enhance the impact of any of your data, and ensuring that the insights that you're using from your dashboard are taken to real life, and that you're coming to any kind of data engagement or usage with the lens of what is the tangible impact that this is having. And I'm just going to give our final tip slide here before I pass over to Cara to take us home and into question land. But just some tips for actions that we'll give you as your quick hits here. Building your dashboards for self-guided use and making it something that's interactive really just creates a way for those actions to be taken even in ways that you may not expect. Choose your own adventure story, if you will, to let people take themselves to new frontiers. And creating routine, baking it into your process like we talked about, just making it that dashboards and reporting are just something that your team naturally leans into. It's also important, we talked about this a few different times here, whether it's the plain text language or just thinking about the continuous improvement and accountability, but users should really be nudged by anything that they're looking at. If this is data that we have to report on, what are the questions that I should next be asking, and how can we make a tangible impact? And last but not least, asking questions even within your dashboards, whether it's you explicitly saying a question that you're wanting to prompt users to look for in the answers of what you're presenting, or if it's just to give a title to a chart and effectively let the questions be implicit. However you're doing that, in the process of use is really important to let people be able to find at least some answers in their data and have some takeaways and some next steps. And with that, Kara, I'm going to pass it over to you to take us home.
Yeah, and actually, I think Christina just put in the chat, which is such a good point to this slide. And I just want to call out, like, a story isn't a story if you're not telling it, right? And so if there's one thing I want to like impart as a takeaway is have the hard work you are doing as a marketer showing up somewhere in an awesome story that again just showcases all the hard work that you are doing. And it doesn't have to be like the most intensive answer all the questions dashboard, but you know, getting started and making an impact is far and above the way than being perfect, right? So again, just make sure your story is being told. So with that, I would say the 4 elements of a good story, like simple ways for your dashboards to make that impact and things to consider as you're building them out. Okay, get that buy-in. Define the goals so everyone is in agreement. Write them down. You know, even if you have to have multiple dashboards, that's okay. But like be in agreement of like what goals that specific dashboard is setting, and then set goals for the next dashboard, and you're not going to lose your way. You're going to be able to, you know, write back to that dashboard. Having a clear audience, right? Identify who your report in those dashboards are meant for. Keep it simple. Make sure your data story is easy to understand, easy to follow. You know, don't write War and Peace, although you can at some point just work up to War and Peace, and then make it actionable, right? So put it into your process. That's the best way to get eyes on the hard work you're doing, is again baking it into your process, and people will be naturally curious about that as well. So I will say, every good story needs a cliffhanger. See what we did there. No, really just want to call it. There are a few things that we have coming up that I just want to share that are really exciting. So we have our mastering data readiness. One thing I'll call it is like learning should never stop. So keep going. We've got busting data silos to fuel AI powered experience on 8/22. And then we've also got a few other webinars that we're thinking about as far as like choosing the right analytics tools for you. That is always a big conversation that comes up. And then how to dive into your analytics tools. So again, really important things to consider. But the rest of the time, we really want to open up to have some Q&A. So, Erin, I'm not sure if we want to start with Christina had some really good ones here too, but I know we had some other questions that had come in previously as well.
Yeah, I loved Christina's question. If I can take one of those just real quick before we dive into others, and I'll remind folks to feel free to put stuff into the chat as well. You know, I think the idea of not having one dashboard to rule them all, to Kara's point, you made this point that I also just wanted to cling on to. War and Peace is not a forbidden place, right? I think if you're thinking about how to get there, I think the one thing that the original War and Peace, to my recollection, didn't have is kind of a TLDR. You know, I find that if you're giving people the opportunity to kind of have that initial spotlight, things really aren't off limits. I just kind of think of it the same way I think of even a webinar, right? If people logged off in the course of 5 or 10 minutes, what are the points that they're getting out of this? You know, the same should be true of the dashboard, that you're leading with the important information up front is just one thing that immediately jumps to me.
I think that's such a good call out. Yeah, when we're thinking about dashboards, it doesn't mean that we can't get to or be able to explain the data that we're viewing as well, right? I think one thing that's another really hard, but it's coming up more and more thing for marketers is how you understand and harmonize your data, right? And being able to communicate what the data pieces you're looking at. I'll quickly give out an example. I actually had a customer who came to me and had 3 different sources that 3 different teams were looking at. And it's a simple source field, but again, literally on the lead, there were 3 sources. And it was one of those things that like the marketer knew how each of those were being communicated, but the people who were using them, I think, didn't always know the end result. So what they want, what we like, if we think about this in context of like a dashboard, we would want to have like one source field that everybody's in agreement in using. But if there's other ones, being able to like show that detail and explain it in another reporting in another reporting way, right? If that makes sense. So it's all about like what's the initial communication. Doesn't mean that we can't get into those details later, right? But I think that's a really good call out.
Yeah, and I think we got a technical question also, and I anticipate that that's probably a lot
Yeah.
of questions people will have, and we're going to try to do our best to speak to as many possible tools as we can. I know there's a lot reflected on this call.
Yeah.
But Kara, the question was for the dashboard that you made, and I have some guidance on this for Datorama as well, but the series of links that you made, can you just talk through what that process looked like?
Sure. Yeah, and there's been two that I've actually done this twice. My personal favorite, because it again it's just like really easy to do, is in CRM analytics. So in CRM analytics, you can actually link out to any URL. And so, barring folder permissions and all of that, what we did is what was nice is like we branded it out, which was really cool. So it looked like the company logo. Um, Again, called it like the dashboard homepage. We even made sections to where each department can go and look. And again, it was just a really powerful way to like have a hub. And all you did was they literally have a link that you can use. In Salesforce, I know there's ways you can do that too. So truthfully, I think the linking out is thankfully tool agnostic. I think the piece that maybe is not as like the branding header piece, right? But I think there are definitely ways you can get to that. Now, what we did is with Serum Analytics, what I was talking about is that we actually embedded it on the home screen. So that way they can go and reference it in Salesforce where they're getting each and every day, which I think is what made such an impact with the customer. But Aaron, I'd love to hear your example too.
Yeah, I think the benefit that I like, and again, this is just kind of getting to know your tools that you kind of come to the approach that you get to. I've seen situations in the past where linking out is done. What I tend to lean on is the core feature that exists already in intelligence, which is the option to put dashboards in folders. We have a lot of the times the things that we'll see is intelligence creates reports out of the box called smart lenses. So we have a folder for that if people want to see any of those, and it's named aptly. Or there's the option of putting together, what is your full packet of different views of the data? Is it omni-channel? Is it paid media? Is it social media? Is it your CRM data? Being able to put all those into folders and teach people things natively, I think is one of those things that is, as much as I can teach people the platform as I go, one of the things I try to lean on is those basic features, making sure that what I do is replicable. But again, that depends on the tool. I think it's a little harder to create some of those links in a replicable way for people in intelligence. And so I try to steer away from it. But if the low lift is to be able to do that and you're able to cleanly, I always one of the other questions, Kara, that I know we talked about a lot that we got was just what are the key factors that you consider when thinking about the way that you tell that story? What are the ways that you kind of think about different tools?
So when I think about the different a lot of we actually have a blog post that you and I wrote that I think is helpful for this. There's a lot of different um ways you can go about choosing what tool makes the most sense for you. For me, there's a couple of different things. So one that jumps out is always like accessibility, right? Is it license based? Is it just like folder permissions like it is in Salesforce? How, if I'm using a tool, I want to make sure when I can get it out to people that they can actually access it. Another one that actually comes up is who's going to maintain it, right? I think that's something else that like a lot of times if it's I'll example I use it like if you're using a Ferrari to go to the grocery store, right? You might not need a really heavily intensive like ETL tool dashboard. Like sometimes a simple Salesforce dashboard gets the job done and you can really be powerful with that. So I think that's a lot of times of like who's maintaining it, how much power does it have for what you're trying to achieve, if that makes sense. But I'd love to hear yours too, Aaron, on some of the ones you thought of too. I mean, David, I need a Ferrari, yeah, just to drive around my neighborhood as well. So I hear
Yeah.
you on that.
And look, you can make the case for a Ferrari. I always think that that's valuable too. Uh, but I think in general, to that same point, I think using what you have. If you don't have access to a Ferrari, I'm not going to speak for everybody. I certainly don't have access to a Ferrari currently. Making use of what you have is often the lowest hanging fruit that I can think of. I think one of the big hurdles is iterating across a lot of different products to achieve similar things. I know one of the things that I've seen is whether it's Datorama to Tableau to CRMA or any of these tools, figuring out how they kind of work together is one of the value adds that I try to provide so that people don't have to integrate some other new thing. And sometimes that means pushing something to its limits. I think there's a good example of like the Salesforce object querying in Datorama or Intelligence is not something that a lot of my users at my time at Salesforce used, but has become probably my favorite connector in the last year and a half as I see how that provides value. And I think just trying to find novel solutions within the things you already own, not to like lose your mind trying to do that. But reaching for the thing you don't have to pay for is always a justifiable process, in my opinion.
Yeah. And actually, Aaron, I have one that I think I'd love to get your opinion on that came through. What are the biggest challenges you've faced when implementing this data story, data strategy within your organizations that you worked with? How have you overcome those?
Yeah, I think generally the question that I always lean to, this is one of our core discovery questions when we're talking to teams, especially if there's not an immediate answer that they know when we're asking about what are your KPIs. I always find, and this is a question for the group to mull over, I think, too, is I'll ask teams as a very last resort, what is your bonus based on? What are the things that you need to implement? And really, I think a lot of times the biggest challenge is just people not knowing what they need to report on and what the core metrics are. And I find that that's kind of my question to kind of probe the hurdles loose, if you will.
I have to agree. I think that challenge of and I've seen this a little bit with bigger organizations, more so than like my SMB customers, where who owns a process or who owns a thing, maybe lives with another team. And so I think that hurdle of ownership a lot of times can be a challenge. I think of a customer specifically that, I was working with and kind of talking through, thinking about like the strategy that's going into building out the dashboard. And they really just they didn't know how certain things were being populated to be able to feel confident about the data that they were looking at. And so I think that was like that ownership piece was really a challenge of owning and knowing the process of those data points. And so I think goal setting can be something that feels daunting and overwhelming. And again, I think having people write those things down can be really eye-opening for organization and kind of put a microscope on what you're doing, what you're trying to achieve, and see some of those pitfalls. A lot of times, when we think about goal alignment, there can be some data hygiene things in the back end that cause that to be a really, really hard thing to put into place, right? I think a lot of what we're talking about today doesn't go without its challenges by any means. And so I think I would liken it to like, a wound. You have to like clean out the bad to make it be really good. And a lot of times that can just be really hard. And so I'm saying all that also to like take a lot of this with a grain of salt, because I think it's easy to uncover some, not great data structures when you're approaching your reporting this way.
I think that makes sense. And I think the last one we'll take is just kind of a more technical one. When you think about integrating different data sources to create kind of that holistic view, what are some of the things that kind of factor into that? I know that's kind of adjacent to storytelling, but what's kind of your opinion there? And I know we both have different lenses we're looking at this from, but curious
I was
for
gonna say,
yours.
I feel like you need to go first on that one. That's intelligence, bread and butter. So why don't you go first, and I'll throw in my 2 cents.
Yeah, one of the things that I think about is kind of an analog here. In my pre-college life, I was thinking about being a screenwriter was like my dream career. And in that process, you really have to have the outline, your cast of characters ready before you start telling the story. And I think one of the things that we try to do as much as possible, and sometimes the answer is that it's just not possible, but is try to set up any of our data connections and any of those data sources beforehand and figure out what the limitations are. Like what's possible in intelligence is different from Tableau, is different from CRMA. So I think asking those questions early and often, is really the best way to do it. And just knowing what your own limitations are is just the last thing I would say, and understanding where other teams are going to need to come in and making sure that you're reaching for those early.
Yeah, and I think you're kind of setting me up in the best way here. What I'll say is I think for a lot of marketers, this is the challenge, right? This is where I feel like we are on this precipice of we have so many tools, so many integrations now that tools like Data Cloud really, I think, make this more easy to digest. So I think I'll kind of call this out of like what I'm seeing. I'm going to turn this into almost like a where do I think the future is going with this? Because I think to your point, like right now, it is just really challenging. And I think you bring up a good point of knowing where your data sources are coming in and how they might join and talk with your other pieces, laying and mapping that out is super, super key. But I think for the future, like when we're thinking about this holistic story of our marketing process and our marketing goals that we're trying to communicate, I think Data Cloud is a big component of that. And being able to have this viewpoint of our data in a more easy to access and holistic way. I think it's just going to continue to be more powerful. And I think us being data stewards and knowing our data is going to be even more important, and how well those join together and then being able to communicate that. I think Data Cloud is going to make that easier as this continues.
Great. And I think that's the last of what we've got. So, Kara, I don't want to rob people of the final slide. I know we've got one last one, which is
Oh,
going to be
but
completely
thank
unpredictable.
you.
Yeah, thank yous. So thank you to everybody who attended. I really appreciate everybody staying on and asking questions and being engaged. And we hope you have a great rest of your day and week. Thanks, everybody.